Welcome, everyone, to Fundamentals of Kabbalah and Hasidut. We are continuing learning from Keter Shem Tov, the compilation of teachings of the Baal Shem Tov. And tonight we start on Torah Nun Vav, a short one, but it's one that many people have heard. And as I mentioned, for me personally, when we hear about a certain Torah from a certain Rebbe or a certain source, and then we find it in the original source, it's always exciting to me. So this is a one-liner that many people have learned or heard, but here it is, right in the Keter Shem Tov, and it says, Ki b'makom she'adam choshev b'machshava, Shem hu kulo. In a place where a person's thoughts are, there he is entirely found. That's where he is. Wherever our thoughts are, that's where we are. A one-liner, but so very important. It's something that we experience multiple times every day because our minds wander. We are in different states of daydreaming throughout the day. And we could be sitting at our desk or sitting on the couch or out in the garden, and our thoughts have taken us miles away, could be lifetimes away, universes away. And for the time that our thoughts are there, that's where we are. We might be physically in one place, but spiritually, our consciousness is someplace else altogether. And I was thinking, one of the ways that we could possibly understand this in various stories of the Baal Shem Tov, it's not that this concept is exclusive to him, but he was very, very known to do what's called kfitzat derech, which literally means jumping along the way, where there are many stories, especially Motzi Shabbos, that the Baal Shem Tov would bring a few of his students with him. They would go into the carriage, and it would seem like the carriage was just flying. And an hour later, maybe less, maybe more, they find themselves in like a place hundreds of miles away. So it's called kfitzat derech. There's a tradition that Yaakov Avinu was able to do kfitzat derech, was able to transport himself through time to another place. Of course, in modern physics, there are many ideas that are similar to this, but here we can understand that it's possible, however we understand these stories, or these midrashim about Yaakov, a number of stories about Yaakov, where he did kfitzat derech. He was able to transport himself many, many, many miles in a very short amount of time. So here we could possibly understand where a person's thoughts are, that's where they are. But here it means it almost literally, that if the Baal Shem Tov or Yaakov Avinu concentrated on being in a certain place, well, that's where they were. It's almost like in the TV series, Beam Me Up, Scotty. And then a second later, they were literally some other planet, some other place. Beam me up, Scotty. Start all those episodes. Anyways, I wanted to start with this because there's a few other Torahs that we're going to learn tonight that are very connected to this idea that where our thoughts are, that's where we are. So now we're going back to Memchet, Torah Memchet 48. And it says like this, and we'll see how what we just learned applies to this Torah. That's why I wanted to learn the other one first, even though it's later in the book. So it says, Biur Shas, it says in the Gemara, Kol Hadar Be'eretz Yisrael Domek Mish Yesh Lo Elokah. Someone who lives in the land of Israel, it's as if they have a God. The Kol Hadar B'chul, anyone who lives outside the land of Israel, Domek Mi She'ein Lo Elokah. It's like as if they don't have a God. Now, obviously, this is a very, call it extreme statement, but it's trying to make a point, that there is a vast difference of spiritual quality between Eretz Yisrael and outside of Eretz Yisrael. That's the point, but they frame it in the way it's as if one has a God in Israel and does not have a God if they're outside of Israel. So we continue. And those who are careful with text have a question about this. Biur zeh al pi ma shebier b'mishneh ma ben talmidei Avraham Avinu letalmidei Bilam Rasha. And this is, he's quoting from Pirkei Avot in the 5th chapter, the 19th Mishnah, that what is the difference between the students of Avram Avinu and the students of Bilam, the evil sorcerer? And so there it says that that Avram Avinu has all of these spiritual qualities, and Bilam, Russia, has all these negative qualities. And so one who is a student of Avram Avinu will have these good qualities, and the ones who follow Bilam will have these negative qualities. So, but he connects it to what he said before about having a God in Israel, and as it were, not a God outside. So he says, "V'hacha nami kach." So he says, the Baal Shem says, I want to make a comparison between these two statements that might seem not connected at all. So he says, Mishahu mitalmidei Avram Avinu, someone who is among the students of Avram Avinu, umatmid b'Torah, and is constantly learning Torah, thinking about Torah, uba avodat Hashem kol hayom, nikra dar be'eretz Yisrael. So he's taking two statements in different places that on the surface we might not make a connection whatsoever. As I mentioned before, the Baal Shem Tov is known for doing this, of taking different verses or thoughts or concepts and finding connections. So here he says, someone who is learning Torah all the time, involved in the service of God, it's as if he's in Eretz Yisrael, because that's where his thoughts are. That's why it was important that we read the other Torah first. That since his thoughts are in Eretz Yisrael, involved in Torah and purity and holiness and Avodat Hashem, it's like they're in Eretz Yisrael. Upam echad nizdamen lo bitul Torah, but the same person, let's say he kind of falls away temporarily even from learning Torah, being involved in holy matters. So he says, She'az dar b'chol. Domelo kemi she'ein lo Elokah ubehefech. So in other words, what he's saying is like this: if someone is following the Torah, involved in holy matters, it doesn't matter where they are in the world. It's like they're in Eretz Yisrael because that's where their thoughts are. And someone who falls away, even temporarily, it's as if during those moments that they're outside of Eretz Yisrael. So we can see the connection here from what we just learned, that a person is where their thoughts are. And here I'll introduce a story from the Tzemach Tzedek, the third of the Chabad Rebbe's. And he lived in the, call it the mid 1800s. And one of his students very much wanted to move to Israel. Already, many of the students of the Baal Shem Tov had moved to Israel, even though number-wise, there still were not that many Jews in Israel in those years. But many of them were from the students of the Baal Shem Tov. Many were from the Vilna Gaon. Anyways, this person came to the Tzemach Tzedek to ask for a blessing. It wasn't a simple trip. And one quite literally took their life, endangered their life by coming to Eretz Yisrael in those days. So he wanted a blessing. And the Tzemach Tzedek said, no, it's not a good thing for you to do now. And the man pleaded that he really, really wanted to move to Eretz Yisrael. And the Tzemach Tzedek was steadfast and said, I'm telling you, it's not for you. And then he said, make Eretz Yisrael here. In other words, you don't have to be physically in Eretz Yisrael to partake of the holiness of Eretz Yisrael, to feel the energy, to feel the spirit of Eretz Yisrael. He said, make Eretz Yisrael here. So this is a very deep understanding, the idea of the power of our thoughts to put us where we want to be. Now, obviously, there is a certain, call it mitzvah, or reality of truly being physically in Eretz Yisrael. This idea does not come to nullify the importance of being physically in Eretz Yisrael. It's just saying a person is where their thoughts are. And if one is involved with Torah, then you're like a student of Avram Avinu. But in those moments where you lose that connection, it's as if at that moment you become a student of Bilam. It's also a fairly extreme statement, but the Baal Shem is making a point, and the Gemara is making a point. And many times in learning Jewish topics, there are many extreme statements that aren't necessarily meant to be taken literally all the time, but the idea behind the examples is the main thing. Okay, now we go to Nun Gimel. This is a fairly longer one, but for those who were with us when we began the class, so I mentioned that there is a chance, a hope, a prayer that a ceasefire and a release of our captives may be imminent. We've heard this before, and it hasn't happened, but we're hoping that maybe this time it really will happen. So I was planning to give over this Torah that I'm going to give over now, and we'll see the connection, which I really only thought of a few minutes ago. Like, it's very divine providence that will be learning this. This Torah is a classic example of how the Baal Shem Tov was able to take teachings from the Arizal and make them part and parcel of Hasidic thought and of just consciousness altogether. Okay, so here we go. Nun Gimel. Bekavanot Arizal, Inyan Birurei Nitzisot HaKadoshim Shenaflu Be'et Hashvira. So the Baal Shem Tov is going to explain the intent of the Arizal when he was talking about the idea of clarifying sparks of holiness that had fallen in the breaking of the vessels, Shvirat HaKelim, a concept we've mentioned many times, and in the previous world of Olam HaTohu, the initial vessels were not strong enough to hold the awesome, pure light, and they shattered. And that this world, according to the Arizal, Olam HaTikun, is made from the fallen shards and the light that was trapped, were hostage in these broken vessels. So he says like this, and he further quotes, Hare HaKadosh Baruch Hu boneh olamot umachrivan. It says in the Gemara that God creates worlds and destroys them. And this is just part of what we'll call the evolution of the physical and spiritual worlds. But Tzarich Adam la'alot ulevarer midomem letzomeach chai midaber. So he says, the Baal Shem Tov says, but it's very much from the Arizal, that part of this process of lifting up sparks of light and rectifying the broken vessels is the ability to raise up and clarify sparks of the mineral world to the vegetable world, to the animal world, to the human world. The varera nitzot hakadoshim b'toch haklipot, to clarify these fallen sparks of light, which are everywhere. Everywhere we go, there is something that needs to be redeemed. That's why it's called the world of rectification, Olam HaTikun, excuse me. And the idea of Tikkun Olam, that it seems our entire lives are involved with clarifying, fixing, healing, elevating these sparks of light and fixing the vessels that are holding them. V'zeh tachlit avodat ish Yisrael. And the Baal Shem Tov says, this is the very purpose of a Jew. B'torah u'mitzvot v'kavanat achila. And he says, whether in learning Torah or doing mitzvot, and the kavana when eating. Kemuvar kol echad b'makomo. And each one of these, the Baal Shem Tov explains in different places. V'nodeh ki kol nitzot shebetok domem v'tzomeach v'chulei yesh bo koma shlema mim ramach evara v'shasa gidim. So he says that we should know that every spark that is within the mineral kingdom, the vegetable kingdom, the animal kingdom, the human kingdom, and I'll just interject here, this was the whole purpose and theme of my latest book, Life, Soul, and Consciousness Within All Creation. That's why for me, this Torah is so important, because I wrote a whole book trying to explain it. So he says that within all the different levels of creation, there are whole statures of the 248 limbs of the body and the 365 blood vessels. Kishehu betoch hadomem batzomeach hu bebeit asurim. Now, this is where we get to the divine providence here. He says that these sparks of light trapped in fallen reality that needs to be elevated, fixed, healed, enlightened. He says this is as if these sparks of light are in jail. She'enu yachol lifshot yadav raglav ledavar ki'im rosho al kirav v'kirbo. Misha yachol b'tov machshavato le'alot anitzot hakadosh mitzomech l'chaim medaber hu motzi l'cherut. So I'm just going to paraphrase this, saying that when, and this is the Kabbalistic and Hasidic idea of eating, that within, whether we're eating fruit, vegetable, or animal, or fish, that within them is a spark of godliness, a spark of light, a spark of God's life force that enlivens them. And so when we ingest the food, again, whether it's fruit, vegetable, or animal, there are sparks of light that need to be elevated. And let's say if we eat an animal, well, an animal is eating vegetables, or eating from the vegetable kingdom, which is growing in the mineral kingdom. So when we eat each of these, we are raising up the sparks, and they become part of us. But if we eat with kavana, if we eat with holy intent, that's what lifts them up. And the Arizal talked very much about how different souls in different cycles of reincarnation could find themselves temporarily in the earth, in water, in a plant, a tree, or an animal. And so when we eat them, we may be lifting up a spark that is trapped. That's what he said, it's as if they're in jail. Then he says, Ve'ein lecha pidyon shivuim. He says there is no mitzvah like redeeming captives, gadol mizeh. So here the Baal Shem Tov makes an amazing statement. Just like right now, every Jew, every lover of Israel, every moral and ethical person has felt the weight and the burden of feeling for our captives for 14 months in terrible conditions. And many of them have been shot and killed in captivity. So here he's saying, though, that these sparks of holiness in a fruit, in a vegetable, in a fish, in an animal, these, he says, there's no greater release of captives than releasing these points of energy or light that are trapped and need to be elevated, because the human being is the highest, is called the crown of creation. And so when we eat with kavana, and we live our lives with kavana, and we enter into situations where it's obvious that some kind of rectification is needed here, some kind of elevation, some kind of light is needed, it's like redeeming captives. So it goes on, but I'm going to stop there. So as I said, I had planned on learning this tonight because it points out something that we have mentioned many times, is that the Baal Shem Tov was able to take the very complex teachings of the Arizal and put them forth in a way for a broader audience. And obviously, this is a very, very mystical, spiritual concept. But here he crafts it in a way of making a comparison between helping release someone from jail, helping release a captive from captivity, with our interaction with the world. There's a concept in Hasidut in general that we never find ourselves in a situation where there's not some tikkun that is needed. And this is such an important thing because we are constantly finding ourselves in situations where we say to ourselves, how in the world did I get into this? Or how in the world am I supposed to deal with this situation? Or why in the world am I being tested in this way? And so the basic idea is, and obviously it's not easy to always remember it and to act accordingly, but when we can, it most certainly softens the blow that wherever we are, there's something to do. There's something to fix. So I'm going to throw in a story about the Lubavitcher Rebbe, that there was once a convention in a city in America of women, a Chabad convention of women, and it ended, and I believe it was on a Thursday, and they all go to the airport, and I don't remember if it was because of the weather or a strike. I can't remember, but all the flights were delayed, and it was one of those kind of confusing times where you couldn't get an answer. Is it going to be half an hour? Is it going to be an hour? Is it going to be a day? People didn't know what to think. So one of the women sent a message or called the Rebbe's secretary and said, we're stuck in the airport. What should we do? And so the secretary went to the Rebbe, and he came back and he said, the Rebbe doesn't understand being stuck. So the woman who had called thought that it meant that the Rebbe didn't understand the English, what it means to be stuck. So she explained to him what it means is we're here, we don't know what to do, we feel like we don't have options. That's being stuck. And so the secretary said, no, the Rebbe understands very well, but he doesn't accept that there's any situation where someone is stuck. There must be something that you can do. And so the woman told everyone around her what the Rebbe said. And one of them said, well, we're coming from this convention and we all have these packets of Shabbos candles. So let's spread out all over the airport and do one of the campaigns. Why wait till we get home? And that's what they did. They all went around and they made good use of their time. And however much time it was, the problem in the airport was solved, and everyone got their flights home. So this is just a classic story. The Rebbe says, I don't understand being stuck. There is no such thing as being stuck. Look for something to do it in a positive way. There must be a reason that you're there. Try to find it. And so here, the Baal Shem is teaching about not just eating. He uses the example of eating. And this is a very, very big thing in Hasidic thought. eating with kavana, of lifting up the sparks, of taking the life force in everything that we're eating and elevating it to a higher level where we use that energy to learn Torah, to do mitzvah, to help others, to raise ourselves in consciousness and in holiness, instead of just eating like an animal with no kavana whatsoever. And it's like we had a chance to release the captives and to raise up all of creation. That's why it's a very, very big thing in Hasidic circles that when it could be done throughout the whole week. But especially on Shabbos, it's a big thing that while we're eating the meal, to stop and say, L'kavod Shabbos Kodesh, for the sake of the holy Shabbos. And that transforms eating into a holy mitzvah. L'kavod Shabbos Kodesh. So that's just a very, very, very beautiful thing. And the merit of our learning about this idea of redeeming captives, of redeeming sparks of light, redeeming situations, our very real physical captives should be released very, very, very soon. Tekav miyad mamish. Okay, l'chaim, l'chaim. The next one is Nun Zayin. Nun Zayin. So a pasuk here is being quoted. One second. It's from Yeshayahu, the 58th chapter, the 13th verse. It says, Ashiva ragli el edotecha. No, excuse me, that's not the place. I'm sorry. It's from Tehillim, 19th Tehillim, the 59th verse. And it says, Ashiva ragli el edotecha. This is David HaMelech speaking. And he says, I will return my feet to your precepts. In other words, I'll walk, God, I'm walking in your way. I return my feet to your mitzvah, to your precepts. And the Baal Shem explains, Hahergel, so he says, Hahergel, meaning, this is very important, that the word for doing something by rote, by habit, is from the same root as the word for foot or leg, regel. Hargel means doing something from habit. So the Baal Shem Tov is now going to take this verse, which seems to be talking about, even what David is saying is a metaphor. I will turn my feet to your precepts. In other words, I will walk in your way. So the Baal Shem Tov says this is hinting to something about doing things by habit. And he says, and it's the same thing. This is the verse from Yeshayahu 58:13, where it says that if you will hold back your feet on Shabbat. This is part of a whole saying from Yeshayahu that many people say as part of Kiddush during the day. Is one thing, it's forbidden to walk a certain distance outside of an area that has the 2,000 meters that has what's called an eruv that allows us to carry within a certain space. And if you go outside of the eruv, you can only walk so much. So Yeshayahu says, as part of this description of keeping Shabbat, Im tashiv mishabbat raglecha. So the Baal Shem says, Hahergel shel olam hazeh, o az hachalticha nachalat Yaakov avicha. So he says that in this verse also from Yeshayahu, it's hinting to, if on Shabbat you will break free from your habitual lifestyle, your habitual consciousness that surrounds you during the 6 days of the week. And then, this is also from Yeshayahu, then, it's actually the next verse in Yeshayahu, then you will inherit. God says, and then I will have you inherit the inheritance of Yaakov, your father, that is like without boundary. So in other words, the Baal Shem Tov is trying to make a point here, is that habit and rote. I used a word in the last story about being stuck. It keeps us stuck in a certain kind of consciousness where we can't break free. We get overcome with living within a certain borders of habit. So the Baal Shem brings even another verse, V'yisa Yaakov et raglav, Gam kein hahergel. All of these verses, here it says, and Yaakov lifted up his feet and he traveled. So that's kind of a little bit of a clumsy way. Could have just said he traveled. What does it mean? He lifted up his feet and he traveled. But it's trying to tell us is that this verse actually comes after Yaakov has the dream of the ladder. And he's inspired. And now he wants to integrate what he's learned from this dream of the ladder and how God spoke to him, and to make it part and parcel of his life, his consciousness. So it says, Vayisa Yaakov et raglav. In other words, he could now move beyond his life of rote and routine. He could reach a new level. Sheyatsa migashmiut leruchniut beheven. And in this way, a person could go from physicality to spirituality and understand this. The Baal Shem says, and understand this. So here is a relatively simple idea, is now even Shabbat can become rote and habitual. Even something as holy as Shabbat, if we don't make a constant attempt to fill it with new ideas, new kavana, to live in the moment, we could fall into the routine. It's the same prayers every Shabbat, same 3 meals. And for many people, it's the same songs that we sing. It's the same kiddush, same time we go to shul, the same time we come home from shul, the same kiddush. Even though it's all beautiful and wonderful and holy, it's actually quite easy to fall into a rote and routine about Shabbat and not looking at each Shabbat as a brand new opportunity to reach incredible heights. Like Yeshayahu says, that when we can break our hergel, which is represented by our feet. You know why? Because the deep connection here is when we walk, usually we don't even think about it. Okay, if you're climbing a mountain, you're gauging every step. But if you're just walking down the street, especially today when everyone is on their device, we don't think about walking. Our feet kind of automatically walk for us. And so that's why the word for rote and routine is taken from the word regel, because that is the action of feet in most cases. It's involuntary. It just happens. But when life just happens, it becomes empty of spiritual content. So that's the point that the Baal Shem Tov is making here. The next one also seems like a simple one, but it's extremely profound. This is Nun Tet. Nun Tet. So here, one second. This is a statement in the Gemara. Benashke ara v'rakia, that the earth kisses the firmament. So the Baal Shem explains, Likshor u'lechaber ma'asei hagashmi b'ruchani. What does it mean that the earth kisses the firmament? So he says this is teaching us that we should always be connecting our physical actions to a spiritual goal or a spiritual kavana. We should invest. We should integrate into every physical action a spiritual kavana. And he continues by saying the following. Kol asher timsa yedecha la'asot b'kochacha asa. So this is an expression. This is in Kohelet, the 9th chapter, the 10th verse of Kohelet says, everything that you do, everything that your hand does, do it with your full strength. I'll read it again in Hebrew. Kol asher timsa yedecha la'asot, everything you find your hand to do, b'kochacha asa, do with your full conviction, your full force. Because when a person connects their physical action with a spiritual kavana, that when a person is able to transform their physical actions, not transform, actually to elevate, to fill their physical action with spiritual content, he says an amazing thing. He says, this creates a unification of the Holy One, blessed be He, and the Shekhinah. Now this is seemingly a simple idea, but here he is making a connection between our physical actions and the unification of the Holy One, blessed be He, and the Shekhinah. Many of you may know that the Arizal created a kavana that is said before many mitzvot. L'shem yichud kudsha brichu v'shchinte. V'yached Shem Yud and Hey and Vav and Hey. V'yachuda Shalim b'Shem Kol Yisrael. There are different versions of it, but basically, L'Shem Kudsha Brichu V'Shchinte, and for the sake of unifying the Holy One, blessed be He, and the Shekhinah, God's indwelling presence. to unify, liyached, the four-letter name of God, Yud and Hey and Vav and Hey, b'yechuda shalim, in a complete unity, b'shem kol Yisrael, for the sake of all of Israel. So if you listen to those words carefully, it's as if saying the unification of the Holy One, blessed be He, and the Shekhinah is somewhat dependent on our unifying them. Now, obviously, God is unified and one and unique and infinite and perfect, without any outside contribution or interference. But here, the actual tone of this unification is trying to teach us that not only do we want to be part of God's unity, but we actually have a part in not so much creating it, but revealing it. Is that when we can unify physical and spiritual, that reveals the unification of God in the world. So this, of course, is a major, major idea. Once again, how the Baal Shem Tov is taking the teachings of the Arizal and trying to bring them down to earth in a way that we could actually apply them, understand them, and live them. Okay, I think we have time for one more, and this will be Samach Aleph. And this is also one that is so applicable to all of us. It says, he quotes the verse, Vayechi Yaakov be'eretz Mitzrayim. And Yaakov lived in the land of Egypt. This is the opening verse of the last portion of the book of Bereshit. This is when Yaakov comes down to Egypt. And here it says that Yaakov lived in the land of Egypt. And the Baal Shem Tov explains from a different verse, which says, B'tsar harchavtali, in my narrow place, in my troubles, you have widened the path for me. You have expanded my consciousness, my possibilities. Now here, the reason he's bringing this verse is because the word tsar is the root of Mitzrayim, of Egypt. The root of Egypt, it comes from the word narrow. So here the verse is saying, in a narrow place, you have broadened me. So the Baal Shem Tov says, Ki tzadikaya inun shluchei de matronita, litpalel al achisaron shel hashechina. Now, what I just read and translate, this becomes one of the most important ideas in the Hasidic idea of the purpose of prayer. So he says, because righteous people, they are messengers of the Shekhinah to pray for the lackings of the Shekhinah. Now, we just stated in the previous one that God is perfect, God is one, God is unified. So what does it mean in that which is lacking from the Shekhinah? So this goes with the concept that the Shekhinah goes with Israel into exile. That when Israel is in exile, it is as if the Shekhinah is in exile. God's presence is in exile. It is not recognized. It's not respected. It's not acknowledged. And so righteous people, their job is to be messengers of God, to pray, lehit palel, on this matzav of Israel and the Shekhinah. And in many cases, what's called Kol Yisrael, all of Israel, is equated with the Shekhinah. V'zeh noda meha chisron cha. And so the Baal Shem Tov says an amazing thing. He says, so what do we know about what's lacking from the Shekhinah? It's such a it's something you can't get your head around. He says we understand what is lacking for the Shekhinah from our own lackings, and that's how we know how to pray for the Shekhinah. And that's what it means that Yaakov lived in the land of Egypt. Rotzelamar, al yedei hagalut hatzarot v'hameitzarim shoyo liYaakov yada litpalel mizeh al chisaron hashechina shenikra Yaakov. So here the Baal Shem Tov says that the idea here is how will we know how to pray for the Shekhinah? Again, by our own lackings. And he brings again that Yaakov lived in Mitzrayim. He lived in a place of narrowness, but it says that he lived. All the commentators talk about this. It never says, and Yaakov lived in the land of Israel the whole time he was there. It never used that language. All of a sudden, he goes down to Egypt, and it says he lived there. And we're also told it was the best 17 years of his life, because he was reunited with Yosef, and all of his family was together. It's true, they were in Mitzrayim, but the slavery hadn't started yet. But still, it was a somewhat narrow place, but Yaakov learned how to live there. So that's what he says, that from experiencing the society around him and the narrow consciousness of the place called Egypt, that's how Yaakov knew how to pray for the exile of the Shekhinah, just like he was now outside of Israel. And as he was going down to Egypt, God came to him and said, I will be with you. I will go down with you, and I will surely bring you up. And our commentators tell us, what does it mean? I will surely bring you up. It's like a very strong language. They say it means I will go down with you, and I will come up with you when I bring you out. So in other words, when Israel is in exile, so the Shekhinah is in exile. And so when I mentioned that this is such an important idea, is that Hasidic thought is that through our own experience of narrowness, that we should be praying that not only that we can come out of exile, but the Shekhinah can come out of exile. That we should be praying that God's presence in the world is not recognized, not respected, not praised, not known. And that should bring us a certain amount of pain, because as the Baal Shem said, that righteous people, they are the messengers of God. And so if God is in exile, what we should be praying that God's presence in this world should not be in exile. Just like we pray that we shouldn't be in personal exile, or Israel as a nation should not be in exile. We should always be praying that God's presence in the world should not be in exile. And then he says, what I just translated, I didn't talk about, but he said that Yaakov, because he was now in Egypt and he could feel the lacking there, therefore he knew how to pray for the Shekhinah. And he says, HaShekhinah shenikra Yaakov, that the Shekhinah is sometimes called Yaakov. So the question is, because it says, Vayechi Yaakov, Shechiber HaShekhinah El Chaya Chayim, because Yaakov, by saying Vayechi, that Yaakov lived, that by him dedicating his time and effort and consciousness and prayers to redeeming the Shekhinah, so it brings, as it were, life force to the Shekhinah to come out of exile. And that's what it means, the first verse that he read, Ubitzar hirchavtali, in my narrow place, you have expanded me. So here it sounds like God is helping Yaakov expand his consciousness while he's in a place of tsar. And this applies to all of us. All of us experience different levels of narrow places on almost a daily level. A daily occurrence that we have challenges, seemingly unending challenges. But challenges can also be turned into opportunities. And so whenever we can turn a challenge, a narrow place, into a broad place, God will help us. God will help us take the narrow place and broaden it. But I want to end with one thing here. What does it mean that sometimes Yaakov is, the Shekhinah is called Yaakov? So it was actually last week's Parsha. After Yaakov fights with the angel and he assumes a new name, Yisrael. And then it says that he came to Shem and he bought a portion of Shem, one of the two places that it says in the Chumash that we bought. Avram bought the cave of Machpelah, and Yaakov buys a part of Shem. And then it says, this is chapter 33, verse 20. It says, Vayetzev sham mizbeach, vayikra lo El Elohei Yisrael. Yaakov made a altar, and he called it God, the God of Israel. That's what it says. He built an altar, and he called it God, the God of Israel. The sages actually, Rashi explains that it's not that he called the altar God, the God of Israel, even though when you read it, it might sound like that, but Rashi makes it clear. He's not naming the altar God, the God of Israel. He made an altar and he called out. He called God, God, the God of Israel. But the sages make it an astounding statement here. You can read the same words in the same order, but by changing the punctuation slightly, you could read it that he made there, that Yaakov made there an altar, and God called him, meaning God called Yaakov, God, the God of Israel. Now that's like an astounding statement. How in the world do we understand, and why did the sages say this? But what they mean here, it says the name of God, Elohei Yisrael. In English translation, the closest word to what we call God, meaning in the generic sense, is this two-letter name of God, Aleph and Lamed. But that name was just given to Yaakov. He became Yisrael, Yeshar Kel, straight to God. So what the sages were alluding to, not that God was calling Yaakov God, but he was saying, you now have a godly aspect in your very identity. You're now Yisrael. And so he called him Kel Elokei Yisrael. So it's read that God called him Kel, comma, the God of Israel is the one who called him Kel. So a very creative way of reading this verse. And that's how we can understand what the Baal Shem Tov says here, that sometimes the Shekhinah is called Yaakov. But in a deeper sense, it's the aspect of Yisrael. And as we said, when we go down to exile, the Shekhinah, as it were, goes down to exile. And when we can expand our consciousness and to share that consciousness with the world, that's why it goes back and it says, because righteous people are messengers of God. And for those who listen to Rabbi Y.Y. Jacobson, he's always using this idea that we are messengers of God. We are messengers of light and healing and love. That is ask. That is our tafkid. And so here, even when we're in exile, we're still messengers of God. And hopefully we can take, no matter what situation we're in, and somehow turn it in a way that it can expand our consciousness in a certain way. May we all be blessed to take our narrow places and make them wider.